welcome to episode 7 of Hardcore Gaming 101's top 47,858 games of all time podcasts, where we objectively and definitively rank the games you nominate. I'm Satanga, and with me tonight are...
I'm Bobinator.
X Factor.
And I'm Carl.
Excellent. And with us not today is Xerxes, because he's off having a vacation in what I assume is a newly discovered planet on the edge of the solar system, but
Busy bastard.
Yeah,
He shouldn't go there. Those, Cybermen live there. Don't go to Planet 10. Bad idea.
Jeez, we're already getting all Doctor Who in here. But, yeah, so Satanga here is... i.e. me, is probably the one schmuck who's been roped into doing the most of these lately, so I was nominated to host for better or worse, more than likely worse, but I'm running the show here, and I apologize if it's a real train wreck, but you know who to blame, so send it to P.O. Box... No, wait, do P.O. Boxes even exist anymore?
Oh, yeah.
Of course they do. But couriers don't always deliver to them, so it's actually kind of a pain in the ass.
Any hate mail can go straight to Ralph Nader.
Yeah. Is Ralph Nader still exist anymore? I have
no idea.
I'm only in my mid-20s, and I feel like a real old fogey who can't keep track of anything. But, alright, so, before we get started, I'll remind... quickly of the ground rules here. Number 1, all rankings are final, official, and scientifically accurate. Number 2, you can nominate games via Twitter at the hashtag top47k, that's 47k. Number 3, for now, game nominations must be over 2 console generations old. The line is drawn at PS2, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, and original Xbox, nothing beyond those systems. And number 4, we rank the first release of a game, not ports or remakes, so we are sticking strictly to the original. And with all that out of the way, our first nomination for tonight is Descent, submitted by Alm Rider. And I know that X is a really big fan of Descent, which is part of the reason why I have him on tonight. So if he wanted to start out with anything on it?
Well, where would you like me to start?
Okay, well, let's look at Descent. Let's position Descent quickly, because, it's 94, 95 release, very early, first-person-y shooter-y thing?
It was, it came out at a point where it was definitely... considered to be one of the big Doom killers. I don't think it really was, just because a lot of FPS fans generally don't like to have to deal with sim controls to get around blasting stuff out of the sky, but
it's not really that simulation based. I mean, the controls are a bit tougher to get used to than most FPSs, but
yeah,
I mean, it's not like you have to deal like the thrust or dealing with your engines or the kind of things you have to mess with in TIE Fighter or Wing Commander.
Right.
Because we didn't really go into that. It's like an 8-directional, full rotational FPS. That's unique, right? That's pretty much completely original.
Yeah. I mean, when it came out, it was definitely the first game like that had been made. Well, let me think about that.
Well, if not the first, then probably the most prominent.
Yeah, it was definitely the most publicly out there. Hi, Cat.
Because obviously there were plenty of space games and that sort of thing where you floated around in zero gravity and you could move around freely. But this is set in corridors and stuff, so it's it's like the levels of Doom or whatever, but you're floating around and you can move all over the place and this hover sort of robot car thing. I don't remember what you.
Yeah, I mean the very first. I want to say the first 2 levels of the game actually take place on Earth's moon. So, and then you're slowly going farther and farther out of the solar system, clearing out these different mines. The whole concept of there being very little gravity to begin with is kind of pounded into your brain to start, and then it just gets weirder from there.
Yeah, as I recall, it's like the premise is that you're the pilot of a mining vessel who gets sent out by your very shady corporation to do some very shady business throughout the solar system, and it invariably involves flying through corridors and blowing up reactors. I forget what the plot reason was for that exactly, but your goal in every mission is to blow up a reactor at the end of the stage.
Can I bring up, one minor thing I kind of appreciate about Descent?
Sure.
Well, this is kind of around the time when, obviously, Doom was a huge thing. You had a Rise of the Triad with, multiple blood levels and ludicrous gids and all that, and I think it's kind of interesting, almost a little bit refreshing, that Descent does not do that. You're mostly fighting robots with lasers and missiles. You're rescuing people, and it's kind of interesting. It's a game you would not feel terrible in your children play. I think I recall seeing blood as a wall texture, but that's about, the most objectionable thing in the game.
That's a good point.
There's that, and then I think I might be mistaking it for the second game, but I know that both games have one specific robot design where it's got, these jagged-edged claws that it comes up to you and just rakes across your ship with. I recall one of them does have, a little bit of red on the tips of them, and I'm not sure if that was intentionally part of the design, that was the color metal that was used on the robot, or if that is actually supposed to represent blood. But either way, it's fairly innocent compared to a lot of other FPSs at the time.
Yeah, there may be implied deaths around, but Descent was, for its time, the most PG first-person shooter out there. Perhaps only the only FPS I could think of that was more kids-friendly was Chex Quest.
Well, there's also Ken's Labyrinth, and I guess Nightmare 3D, but don't play Nightmare 3D.
No, don't.
Play Descent instead.
Oh god, nobody.
You could play Hugo 3D.
No,
same game.
That's the same thing.
No, wait.
Yeah, yeah.
Hugo is terrible, and he will earn a very low ranking if he gets nominated. But
to get back to the game, though,
yeah,
I admit I had kind of a hard time with this game. I was playing it hotshot for when I was just getting my ass kicked, so eventually I just had to give up, and I could only make progress doing it rookie.
Yeah, the controls are very ambitious, but they are a bit fudgy. When I played through it, I could never tell what the floor and ceiling was for most of the time, even with the map, which, the map is impressive, but even that's a little confusing to navigate, and, but yeah, impressive doesn't necessarily mean
the map
good.
does its best, It's there's only so much you can do with, a full 3D directional map. It's going to be a bit tough.
Yeah, really. Oh, God. I'll be honest, I think that map was what kept me from being able to beat the game as a kid, because you get into those bigger levels where it's okay, so here's where the bad guys are, here's where the reactor is, here's the exit way over here, and now I've got to figure out how to get there from here really, really quickly. And then plus there were later levels too where they would trick you, because in some of the earlier levels, whenever you would blow up the reactor, there'd be certain doors that would open. But what they don't tell you right away is that later levels, they reverse it. And when you blow up the reactor, not only are there certain doors that'll open, but then other doors will close on you. So the path that you might have been considering to go to get to the exit out of the mine might not be even open for you anymore.
So I guess we should, I don't know if, did we quite make this clear, but when you blow up the reactor, you have a time limit before you lose because the base self-destructs. I don't know
I'd
if we...
say only the first level, it's actually that obvious where the exit is, so it's pretty tough to actually get out in time.
Yeah.
You still progress if you run out of time, but you lose lives.
This is one of those horrible FPSs that have lives because...
Oh, yeah.
Whatever.
Rise of the Triad had those too.
One of the weird things this game would do is when you would die, assuming you didn't die in the reactor explosion, in which case there's nothing doing for you. But if you died to gunfire from one of the other robots, your ship would explode, but you would drop all of your weapons and power-ups and stuff just in that one little spot. It would just kind of explode and expand out in like this explosion of shrapnel, except it was just weapons and power-ups. And then if you remembered where you died, you could go back and pick all that stuff up, provided that you had another life to spend.
Right, because the framing device is you're piloting a robot or whatever. You're not actually there. Is that right?
I'm assuming that's how they justify it. I don't know if they ever mention that though.
I'm pretty sure it says that you're actually in the ship.
Maybe it's a different guy, because I do know that there is like slightly more story than Doom. You get like a mission intro, I think, for every stage. You get like a little guy that talks to you and says, "You got to do this," and that sort of thing.
Yeah, because they had enough story in the first game to even carry it on into the second game and turn it into like a full cinematic thing. Where
and the first and second game, they're quite similar. They're like the same engine and everything.
Yeah, it's basically
like
as if
the exact same game.
Doom and Doom 2, more or less an expansion pack sequel, but that's certainly not a bad thing, especially when the third game really drastically changes things. Although, I gather Descent 3 isn't bad, it's just a real departure from the first two.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, it plays the same. It's just a little bit more... It's more like the Quake 2 to Quake 1. Because the objectives are different for each area that you're in, so it's not always just going and blow up the reactor and then get to the exit. Like I think the first mission you do is, I can't even remember. It's been so long since I've played it now. I want to say it's like you have to break into this base, which is actually the base. It's a like a file base for the company that you used to work for in the first two games. And you're trying to get a copy of your contract, I think, because basically they've written you off as being dead, and now you're trying to figure out how to get your money from them to start. So this kind of puts you in a really awkward situation.
That's the perils of at-will employment, that's countries probably heading towards it at this rate. I don't know.
That's why America doesn't hire mercenaries, right?
Nothing proven or documented. Not on record, anyway. Wink. Yeah, it's been a bit of a while since I've played Descent as well, but once you know what you're doing to it, fiddly controls aside, the game becomes straightforward, but at a definite challenge peak, and it gets really hard really quick. The stage that had what I call totally not 9 Inch Nails music, I think stage 11, that took me like 20 freaking tries to try and beat without blowing up. It was ludicrous. There's lava everywhere. And then, some of the enemies you face are, just real jerks, to say the least. The worst one in the first game, by and far, were the Class 1 drillers, these little gray jerks that would pop out from corners and blast you with an undodgeable hit-scan Vulcan cannon. You pretty much just had to take their assaults. You couldn't really do anything about it. And thankfully the second game ditched that because, hit-scan weapons for a slightly clunky craft is just real BS.
For me, I still had a hard time using controls. It's kind of like the FPS equivalent of rubbing your head and patting your belly, because you gotta deal with, turning up and down and left and right, strafing, accelerating, decelerating. It's kind of a lot to keep up with once, and on the controller I was using at the time, since I kind of lost track of what I was doing, there was just so much to take in at once.
Yeah, see, when I remember playing it as a kid, we actually had, because one of my dad's standards for computer was you had to have a good joystick because you never knew when you were going to need it. What kind of game you were going to be playing or whatever. And that was one of the games that we had to use a joystick for. Nowadays, the best way I've been able to figure out to set it up is basically like standard FPS controllers like WASD, and then your move up and down controls basically like a jump and crouch key, like if you were playing a standard FPS, and then just use your mouse to do all the turning. So it's kind of like just playing a regular FPS, except you have no clip on.
Yeah, that's exactly how I configured it when I got around to it. But just having those 2 extra buttons that you have to that you're required to hover up and down and then manually position yourself, and like you have almost no inertia to deal with, so you have to push yourself forward. I mean,
Yep.
I think I had it that what would be forward and backward in a normal FPS were turn up and turn down, and I had to devote 2 other keys to moving forward and backward. It really did feel more like I was operating a machine rather than walking, which is appropriate to the game itself, but pretty tricky. I still couldn't say that even by the end of the game I fully got the hang of it.
Yeah.
Well, you could play it on the PlayStation 1.
I did actually rent it for the PlayStation, and I think that turned me off to the game when I was a kid because I had no goddamn idea what I was doing. So then it took me.
I believe I did actually try on the PS1 once, and there just literally are not enough buttons on the PS1 to make it comfortable.
Yeah, that was a problem I had too. I liked that they added the colored lighting and stuff, but that was like the only feature I would have recommended over the PC version.
Yeah,
Does it have new levels too, or?
It might have had some. I don't know. I didn't make it far enough to find out.
I think it had a redux soundtrack at least.
The soundtrack in general is quite good, but
only.
Really only on all 32. The MIDI soundtrack's not brilliant.
Yeah. I have this on OGG Og Vorbis files, and I'm pretty sure that's the sound setting to which it's attuned. And some really fantastic stuff. Certainly getting into the industrial trend that NIN and Ministry were riding at the time, or at least I think so. I can sort of hear that influence in there. Of course, not full and out composed by Trent Reznor like Quake would be a couple years later. But
well, that's the thing. Like it sits nicely in sort of Doom and Quake sort of style of music presentation. So I feel like that sort of thing.
Yeah, the game overall, I'm surprised that it had like fully 3D models a year or two before Quake was out, because I know that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm reading Masters of Doom right now, and John Carmack really toiled endlessly to try and get the game working the way he wanted, and he was getting really frustrated with the development because the maps would just keep breaking, like just blue voids into nowhere would pop up, and it just took him so long to try and get it like that. So I have to wonder what Interplay and Parallax Software's secret was to getting this game to looking the way it did.
Well, one of the things was there's not as nearly as much character animation in Descent. That's, I think, one of its big advantages. It's a lot of blocky ships that just sort of turn and look at you and stuff.
That's a good point. I hadn't considered that. The ships really just are built as they are, and having the convenient excuse that you're just fighting robots that don't necessarily have to move, but just have to propel themselves. I think there might be a few robots that have like movable arms they try to slice you with, but
like that one I mentioned with the claws.
The claws,
yeah.
yes, exactly.
So Tenga, do you want to?
Yeah.
Rank it?
Yeah. You think we've talked about this a good deal? Yeah. I think it's about time then.
Here's my pitch. Between Super Mario Land and Wonder Boy.
Yeah. I was wondering how high this game was going to get, because Descent is actually a classic. We didn't push it very hard, but Descent is an extremely well-regarded game.
I think it is our first FPS of this podcast, so...
I almost feel as if we've been talking more about its negatives, or at least that's sort of the impression I was getting. I apologize if that's the impression I gave off. Because the game does certainly have control janglies, which I'd say are its most difficult part to get around. But aside from that, the graphics, I think, still actually look pretty neat for how relatively minimalist they are. The soundtrack's great. The enemy variety is pretty astounding. There are over 20 different robots that you get to. They had quite a lot more enemies than Doom and Rise of the Triad and its contemporaries had. And the stages, they go through they like get darker and more sinister as you head on. Like a lot of purples in later stages, as I remember, because purple's an apparently a really evil color. I'm just rambling. Oh,
that was another thing that the game had that I always forget about, because it's such a feature that's taken for granted nowadays. Is the dynamic lighting.
Good point.
I mean, it didn't really have colored lighting, but it had very, very rudimentary dynamic lighting, and yeah, without that, they wouldn't have been able to do those dark levels like that.
No, definitely.
If I had to pick a place, I would say right above Super Mario Land, like between that and Space Harrier, because it's definitely not better than Space Harrier.
That's right. If we're talking free
I'll
games.
accept that.
There's not very many games that are better than Space Harrier.
If we purely go by like 8 directional or it's like super 6 billion axes FPSs, Descent is probably the best. Like there's not that many. There's one by Psygnosis, and there's a couple of others that are not particularly as good.
Like Forsaken, maybe.
Yeah, like Forsaken's pretty
that
good.
one, yeah, that came out after though. I know which one you're talking about. I think it's Project Firestarter.
I think you're close, but people keep saying Project Firestarter is the Commodore 64 game, but it's
Oh, that's right. That's the Alien game.
We're not talking
What
about.
are you thinking of?
We're not talking about the Prodigy either here. At least I don't
No,
think.
there is a Psygnosis game. I think it does have like fire in the something in the name, yeah. But no, this Descent's really good. I wouldn't be opposed to putting it up there. That feels like a good place for a Descent game, and our first FPS apparently. That's impressive that we haven't done any yet, but it's well worth playing. It's always worth giving Descent a try if you haven't played it. It's a great game.
My judgment. I'm thinking that Below Super Mario Land was actually a little more appropriate, to be honest. I mean, I do think Descent.
You think Game Boy Super Mario Land is better?
I admit I'm a bit of a Mario fanboy and I actually do like that one, but it's easy to play and Descent is not. Like, I think Descent's really fantastic, but it has a pretty high barrier of entry, and I think the controls are going to be a turnoff to some people who want to look into it. So
yeah, but if it turns off those some people, there's like literally a billion FPSs that are not Descent.
Yeah, but on that same token, if there's nothing quite like Descent, then it can be tricky for people who really want to appreciate it. I mean, I didn't like it at first when I played it a long time ago, and only like over the past 5 years have I really come around to thinking it's a real classic.
I'd say it's good, but it's not like the best early FPS compared to something like Doom.
Well, because I do think that
it's
distinctive enough. It's a sidestep from Doom. It's a different kind of game. Like, the fact that you have... I think that it works very well because a lot of these early FPSs, a lot of them, they're very maze-like. I think Descent has some of the best mazes around because they're so mind-bendingly difficult to get your head around, because it's a full 3D maze rather than a basic flat level that you just kind of bump into walls around. I think that's really good.
All right, I'll place it above Super Mario Land if you three guys are in consensus of doing so.
Well, Bob didn't put it there to begin with. Bob, what is your opinion now?
Well, if it's unanimous, I think I'll go with it.
It's not unanimous. Satenga would prefer to put it below Super Mario.
It's basically 2v2.
I need to be overwritten here.
My reasoning for below Super Mario Land is that Descent is good. I'm not going to deny that, but Super Mario Land was just like really showed what the Game Boy could do for action games he did properly. I'd say it was kind of a milestone.
Actual games. Wait, you got something against Tetris?
Oh, Tetris Schmetris, come on.
Does that make sense though? Am I explaining this right?
No, I totally understand.
I mean, Bob. I understand.
I mean, you've said that, but is Descent not a technical marvel? I mean, we just said it was a technical marvel.
It is.
Well,
but,
true.
like I said, it's that
on it, really.
It's that ease of use thing that I pitched that is going to be a turnoff to people who want to play it. I mean, Super Mario, any Mario platformer, you know what you're doing right away, but, you know, for Descent, it can be tricky to really get the controls the way you want it, even if you have a flight stick, as mentioned. I mean, I don't want to dwell on the controls so much, because, you know, if the rest of the game is great, then, and I'd say the rest of the game is great, then, you know, it can be worked around if you're willing to devote time into it, but not everyone will. And that, and well, the map sucks, also.
You guys can put it below if you want, but you have to deal with the, FPS heads they'll tear you limb from limb. These Descent guys, they're crazy. They're 3 Descent fans that are still alive today.
You mean us?
You know.
Okay. All right. Well, Descent's an excellent game. I don't want to be speaking, you know, too heavily against it, because it's definitely going to end up on the top half of our list and will likely stay there. But it is pretty difficult to beat a Mario game, which, you know, some games have done, but Descent comes really, really, really close. So, between Super Mario Land and Wonder Boy and Monster Land, it shall remain, and that is our definitive scientific reasoning. Alright, next on our list, nominated by Danny Bound, is Yoshi. As it's known as in America. In Japan, it's also called Yoshi's Egg, and in Europe and Australia, it was called Mario and Yoshi. But
all of which are superior names, because Yoshi is the worst name for a game.
Yeah, there's this NES game that's just called Yoshi, and gives you no indication as to what it is from its title, when it turns out to be a puzzle game of all things.
It doesn't even make sense. Like, it doesn't use the character of Yoshi. There's an egg in it.
No, you are controlling Mario, actually, so I think Mario and Yoshi would have been a lot more appropriate. And then with Yoshi's Egg, it's like the egg thingy is what sets it apart from the other puzzle games at the time. So it just that plain old Yoshi, and it's you wonder, like, is it like a historical spin-off like Mario's Missing or what have you? It's I don't know. Like, the thing of it is, I honestly have not played this game much. I was much more familiar with the other puzzle game with Yoshi in the title, Yoshi's Cookie. That one I grew up on, and played my brother at many competitive matches on, and good times with that. But
this is not the good time game. This is Yoshi's Egg.
This game has really had a lot of shit rain down on it before I got around to actually playing it. And
what's so bad about it? It's just a pretty basic puzzle game.
Not bad, but it is basic. Very basic.
That's pretty much the biggest criticism leveled against it, I think, is just how basic it is, because it really doesn't do anything terribly unique. Like, the most interesting thing it does is the thing with the eggs, where you have to have one on the bottom and then one on the top, and however much stuff you get between it is how big of a Yoshi you get. That's your reward. You get a Yoshi. Woohoo.
It feels like a puzzle game for like 3 or 4 year olds, like really basic like visual recognition skills, and that's it.
No, it does feel like, you know, everything's just really blunt simple about it. I mean, you know, there are 4 different characters to link to each other to disappear: the bloopers, the Goombas, piranha plants, and the boos. And then the egg's like the only other thing you get. It's the closest thing you have to like a power-up. But I'll just get my main gripe with this game out of the way. You can only match the characters vertically, no horizontals or diagonals, and I've grown up playing a lot of Dr. Mario, where horizontal eliminations are allowed, and Clax, where you can even have diagonals.
Yep.
And this game was around the time, actually not too long after, what could be considered arguably the ultimate puzzle game, which is Puyo Puyo, was created 2 months prior to this. And why play Yoshi when you can play Puyo? That's what I want to know.
Because
Yoshi, or
well, yeah, the AI can be BS, but that's why you play with someone else.
Mario and Yoshi is available on the Game Boy. That's all I got. Like, it's I mean, yeah, you could play Tetris instead, but it was on the Game Boy, so at least it had a portable option.
Didn't you badmouth Tetris in our last segment?
I did not badmouth Tetris. You badmouth Tetris.
What? I did?
I did say Tetris Schmetris.
Oh,
you did.
X did that. Right.
I
Shoot.
didn't mean it.
You said it wasn't a real game. I remember that. You did it.
I didn't mean it.
Tetris is much more of a game.
I'm sorry, Tetris.
Yeah, Tetris isn't me. We will probably have to get around to ranking Tetris at some point. It's going to end up.
Well, it's going to be like number 1 or 2.
Yeah, it's going to be at least like the top 5, the 95th percentile.
It's not even trying it. It's just going to get straight to the top. Unless someone like says, "Hey, why don't you guys do Ubisoft Tetris?" I know we're not allowed to, but that would be like right down the bottom.
No, I'd really love for somebody to nominate Tetris.
Kids Tetris.
Maybe. Wait, Kids Tetris? Whoa. What's Kids Tetris again? Sega Pico? Okay, fair enough.
I know we want to avoid talking about Mario and Yoshi because there's nothing to say. Like, there is so little to say.
It's all right. There's nothing technically broken about it. It's just a very
I wanted to bring up
dull puzzle game.
Actually, I wanted to bring up Tetris Sphere for a second and note that's one of the most interesting adaptations, even though it's a very loose interpretation of Tetris. But that's enough I have to say about Tetris. We've got to try and focus on Yoshi for what
we
so
but we have
if we
to
can. Yeah, at least.
I know it's not the best game. I'm aware.
Well, it's not bad, what it does is pretty straightforward, but just not a lot of variety. All I know is that there's a Game A and a Game B, and so far I can tell the only real difference in Game B is that, it starts out with some characters already on screen, and if you manage to completely clear the screen, you get a huge level end bonus and then go on to the next one, whereas, Game A is apparently constant, even if you clear everything. That's really the only major difference I could tell. It's not really all that much. Like I said,
it takes a while for it to actually get to a decent speed, too. I mean, yes, you could crank up the speed from the menu, but...
Well, like, the basic game is super, super easy to play. Like, there's, like, almost no strategy. You match ones together that you can match together. And ones that aren't going to match, you put them on top of an egg, and then you build up the egg and you close the egg, and that's it. That's the whole game. There's not enough shoots or not enough variation. There's no real things that can come out and nab you.
I will say this for the game. This is the one defense that I will give it. And Cal, I apologize because you kind of already mentioned this too. When I was a kid, I hate doing this. I hate starting a sentence with that because it's like it's like the gamer equivalent of saying, well, back in my day.
Ooh, nostalgia.
When I was a kid, back when we had to actually rent games from video stores to find out what kind of games they were, this was actually one of the NES games that I remember renting. And of course, they didn't have the box for it, so we couldn't look at the box and find out what kind of game it was. All we knew was, well, it's called Yoshi. Okay, it might be cool. Let's give it a try. And I remember that game. We only had it rented for the weekend or whatever. I remember that game keeping me busy for at least the entire weekend.
Yeah, I don't think we think it's a horrible game. It's just,
but you have to be in a very, very specific situation and or mindset to be able to play.
We can't all be you in the 80s.
Exactly.
No,
like the worst thing about it is it's kind of dull.
Like that's the thing. Like it doesn't hold up for very long. You know, like I think a weekend is fine, but you know,
it's like if you have anything else to play, you're gonna go play that, and you're not gonna play this. But if this is the only game you have for a whole weekend, you're probably going to be sticking with it for a while because it's like, you know, it's kind of dumb, but maybe there's something good happening.
Like it's not so bad that you would walk off and be like, forget it. I'll do, like, if your choice is to do nothing or play this game, you're like, yeah, that's fine. I'll enjoy it. Yeah. It'll be okay. But
it's a fantastic endorsement. It's like, you know, I have nothing better to do than, you know, smoke the bong water here, so I might as well do that.
Well, okay,
now I'm being a real cynical jerk. I apologize.
If you go low enough in our top games list, you'll start to hit games you'll be like, you know what? I think I'd rather just not. I won't do anything.
That's a good point. We're not Eek the Cat levels anywhere near with this. At least I should hope.
I would say, since you mentioned that, as far as like first party like Mario games sort of goes, this is really a bad effort. Like it looks nice. I think the music is okay, but very forgettable.
Well,
here's a question. What would you theoretically do to make this a better game?
That's the thing. The way it's designed, it's very difficult to sort of make it better.
I would have, you know, maybe added a couple more rows and allowed for at least horizontal eliminations as well, and maybe added in another power-up of some sort. I think,
like
maybe
some sort of, like maybe a Mario that can jump on top of Goombas, or some other interaction between the characters that are dropped, because it's basically just Yoshi eggs or matching. Maybe a little bit more variance would work.
Yeah, it's a good idea. It just feels like, you know, this game has the framework of a puzzle game laid down, but it feels like it needs some more brick and mortar built on top of it. And,
like, if you want an example, the Pac-Man puzzle game, that works a lot better, conceptually. You know, where you have ghosts and you have Pac-Man, and you can lead Pac-Man to the ghosts in the box match. Pack Attack, I believe.
Right, that has like power-ups too. That really helps.
That was
this
definitely
game needs a couple power-ups to do something.
Like I think like Pack Attack as like a game that's not about a puzzle game becoming a puzzle game, it fits a lot better.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's let's rank this one. Unless you got more to say.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do. Sadly, I hate to say.
How?
No, I had at least two more items I wanted to tack on top of this. One, I already brought up that I mentioned another Yoshi puzzle game, Yoshi's Cookie, prior, and I played a lot more of that. And that one was developed by Bulletproof Software, the company run by Hank Rogers, aka the man who has held on to the rights for Tetris for Alexei Pajitnov. Until he could finally give them back. So, you know, if we're talking about the Tetris connection here, Yoshi does have a loose but definite input on it. And for a company like BPS who knows puzzle games a lot better, they were able to make something that I felt was a much better use of Yoshi's likeness in a puzzle game than this game that's just called Yoshi, which I just find a little ironic, all things considered.
Even if
Yoshi's Cookie definitely works as a game.
Yeah, I love Yoshi's Cookie, actually. It's certainly not the best puzzle game ever, but I'd rate it higher than this Yoshi by... I have to call it this Yoshi, because you're right, Cal. You mentioned the title now, it's just really bugging me. That's the way it is. Like Taito's Ray Force had, 3 other titles, and, Galactic Attack just sounds really generic. Why not just, stick with Ray Force? But, that's getting off the beaten path. I wanted to also bring up one more thing. I forget who it was that mentioned this was a first-party effort. Was that Bob? Or...
That was me.
Okay. Well, I hate to correct you here because...
It wasn't actually.
Yeah, it was developed by, of all companies, Game Freak, the later creators of Pokemon.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh.
So
that is so almost first party.
They are more or less they're they're very much like HAL Labs in that, they're technically second party, but they may as well be a branch of Nintendo at this point.
The part that really disappoints me is that one of the original designers for this game actually went on to be the lead designer for Intelligent Cube.
Wow, X, where'd you get that? That's a really fantastic fact.
I actually found that on Moby Games because I was looking up. I didn't know who any of the people were that worked on this game, so I was just pegging through the names in the credits, and that is one of the people that worked on it. That was like one of the only other games that they worked on.
Do you have
Cube?
Do you have this guy's name?
Cube's good.
Do you have this guy's name off the top of your hands?
Not off the top of my head, but I can go find it again.
No, I'll gladly give you a minute to look it up because I'd really like to know for posterity. But in the meantime, I can say that prior to this is apparently Game Freak's third game on document. Before that, they had Mendel Palace, aka Quinty, which was actually a pretty fun game, as I recall. It was an action sort of game where you had to beat other enemies by sliding the floor from under them. And then after that was Smart Ball, which is a really neat SNES platformer. But yeah, X, who is that?
I found him. His name is Yuji Shingai.
Gotcha.
And actually, he programmed Intelligent Cube, as well as programming Mendel Palace, which you just mentioned, and Parappa the Rapper.
Wow. I guess this is the black sheep of his repertoire here, to say the least, as it could be said for the rest of Game Freak. But not every company's going to bat 1,000, let's be fair. And this was 5 years before they really struck it big with their main cash franchise, their mother lode, so to speak.
Well, let's be honest. This game is definitely somewhat of a cash-in, a tie-in to make some quick money on Mario.
But it's certainly no Pulse Man, which Game Freak also made 3 years after this and 2 yeyears before Pokemon. God, Pulse Man's so awesome. But we're not talking about that. We are talking about Yoshi.
Here's what I'm thinking. This might be kind of low.
Oh, yes. Let's rank it now. And kind of low, it's okay.
King's Quest and Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Oh.
You would actually
kind of lowballing it.
You'd rank it above Wall Street Kid, really?
Yeah.
I would. I kind of hate Wall Street Kid, I'm going to be honest.
Honestly, I'd put it below Friday the 13th. At least Friday the 13th is a clever idea and execution. This is...
Okay, fair enough.
This is Blandsville.
All right, X, what do you think?
I'm comfortable with that. I'm not really too familiar with any of the games in the lower 40s down here, except for Jones in the Fast Lane, so... And I would rank just about anything over that.
I would agree.
And yet we have 3 games ranked below it on here. Thank you, Stephen Eidher. Definitely one of our most prominent, if not sadistic fans for nominating the bottom 3 we have on here so far. I wonder if anything will break the rock bottom at some point.
Don't encourage people to submit games to beat Stephen Eidher.
All right.
You too can get the most games in the bottom of the list.
Oh God.
Oh wow. So between Friday the 13th and Eight Eyes, in that case, nestled between there. Let me think. I honestly have no arguments with this. I don't have really much ammunition. I don't really have any pros or cons for Yoshi at this point that I can bring up at this final debate stage. It's a puzzle game. It's a very vanilla one, but I think that it really got lost at a time when puzzle games were getting really popular. Okay, you can't beat Tetris, but puzzle games were sort of nestling into a bit of a silver age around this time where other companies were trying their hand at, Tetris-like games or Breakout-like games. And there's a real lot of them for arcades and consoles, and
certainly, a lot of mascots and a lot of popular game franchises got a puzzle game within the next 5 years of this game. There was so many puzzle games for so many characters.
That's true,
I will say this game's better than Sonic Eraser.
Because you had Wario's Woods, you had Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. You had
which to note is basically Puyo Puyo, but with a Sonic shell on top of it.
Which probably they figured was the only way they could market it in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I can understand. You had Kirby's Avalanche,
which is Puyo again.
Is it seriously?
Puzzle
Good
Fighter
lord!
too,
No,
I guess
honestly.
counts.
Oh, I love Super Puzzle Fighter so much. I would.
Dr. Mario, can't forget that.
Which game, Bob?
Dr.
Mario.
Right,
yeah.
of course. That's actually still my favorite puzzle game after all these years, and my mom actually really liked it as well back in the day. But
that one was a first party one though, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe so. Well, now I can't be so sure now as you mentioned it. Let me check.
We don't need to check. What we need to do is rank this game and close it off.
But we have, I think that we have definitively ranked it between Friday the 13th on the C64 and 8 Eyes. And yes, Dr. Mario was Nintendo R&D 1, so it's first party. So nice. I am comfortable with this low, but I think deserving placement for a pretty white bread game on the whole, if you guys are all right.
I think it got very lucky, because it could easily have ended up lower.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not bad, though. It's just...
No, it's not bad. It's just not...
It's just why play it when I could play Clax. When it was released in the 90s, which is the time for Clax, There's just no reason to.
To be fair, if it was bad, we would have more to say about it, and it probably would have been ranked higher.
Ooh.
Or lower, for that matter, actually.
If it was bad, I would have put it so low. It would have been in the Jones zone.
Oh, wow. Alright, so our next game is Super Castlevania 4, as nominated by Voyage to Inhasa, which was a town from a later area in Chrono Trigger, I believe, but we're not talking about that, we're talking about this, a much earlier Super Nintendo game, one that was released in, I think, the first year, if not an outright launch title, in 1991.
Well, I mean, it's 1991... So could it be? Was it a launch title for the U.S.? Because Japan, the release date for the Nintendo was earlier.
But yeah, it was released at the dawning of the SNES's introduction to the gamers public at large, the major rival to the Sega Genesis, which had been sitting pretty for 2 years until Nintendo fired back with their own 16-bit system and its gratuitous Mode 7 rotation processing. But we'll get
1991 Japan and US.
All right, excellent. But let me get this out of the way. Super Castlevania 4 is a really, really weird title because it's not the fourth game overall release. There was, the arcade Haunted Castle and Castlevania The Adventure on Game Boy as well. And I guess it's 4 compared to 3 since it's the fourth one on a main console. But that's a misnomer too, because this game has actually been considered a loose remake of the very first Castlevania. I guess I should step back a bit. If somehow nobody knows what Castlevania is by now, basically a clan of vampire hunters called the Belmonts, or, one of their associates, one of their good friends or whatever, or someone else who's really powerful, take on the rise of Count Dracula, who is a lot more powerful than Bela Lugosi in this series of games. He's like a super demon who apparently ranks higher than the Grim Reaper in the evil hierarchy, and he rises every 100 years, and his castle, which is actually called Castlevania, which sounds
it's a very loose
doofy.
interpretation of the Dracula mythos.
Yeah, let's go with that. I mean, it was heavily inspired by Bram Stoker's Dracula, of course, and a couple of the games actually do reference that book actually happened in the series chronology, but it's a really weird chronology to say the least, and like I said, not helping matters is the fact that this game we're talking about here is apparently a remake of the first, because it doesn't really fit anywhere else into the story, other than the fact that you're the original Belmont, Simon Belmont, the hero of the first two Castlevania games, and of a haunted castle, come to think of it. But yeah, so you're Simon, and you infiltrate the castle, which actually takes half the game to get around to. Like with Castlevania 3, you don't start in Castlevania itself. You have to traverse the countryside.
Dracula owns a lot of land.
yeah, it's all within his domain that you travel through lots of weird stuff, and you face even weirder stuff, the library had a lot of weird stuff in it. Well, Castlevania...
We had Fred Scare and Paul Abdul.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. I should have brought up the manual for this. Oh my god, I remember that.
I kind of miss Konami's dumb manuals. I really do.
Oh, yeah.
They had character.
I mean, they were so innately stupid, but you're right. They were just really impressive at how dumb they were, exactly. Yeah, for those people who don't know, Konami in the NES and SNES days, back when video game manuals used to actually exist, which they don't now, which really saddens me. But yeah, a booklet that told you what the controls were, what you were doing in the games, and, what enemies you could expect to face and all that. And Konami would build these totally non-canon stories at the front page of their manuals, like... I know Metal Gear had you fight against Colonel Vernon Katafi when, spoilers, it's definitely not the main bad guy of the original Metal Gear, to say the least. And then, they did that for out their NES run, and then at the beginning of their SNES publishing, I know that Super Castlevania 4, Contra 3, Gradius 3, and Legend of Mystical Ninja, they all had, and Axelay, they all had similar manuals that had... somewhat doofy, not totally canon stuff, and the level 6th boss, a pair of ghost dancers wielding swords. They were called Paula Abdul and Fred Scare, two really wretched, awful puns that even my brother and I still joke about to this day, because... this is back when games had character, man, and I'm going to cut out at least a minute of this. Guys, you need to help me. I don't want to be babbling all on myself here.
I've got something to say, actually.
Okay, go ahead, Bob. Perfect, excellent.
All right. Now, I'm going to say Super Castlevania 4, I'll be honest, it feels so much better than pretty much any Castlevania game before it. It controls better. It's far less frustrating overall. It just feels like it flows much better overall. And the worst part about that is, immediately after, and this is something that happens a lot of long-running series, they just dump everything they fixed for no particular reason for every game following, and I hate that.
Well, I'm definitely not going to disagree with you. That is the best controlling Castlevania by and far, and... for several years, some things were set back. Most notably, two things in particular. One, that Simon can attack his whip in 8 directions. Straight down only if he's jumping, but he has full control of the whip, and he can even also... He can also hold the attack button and flail the whip around, which is really useful to take care of low-level enemies. And also the sub-weapons are attached to a separate button, both the shoulder buttons, that's easier to toss them, that you won't get confused with accidentally attacking and wasting your hearts. And also the second...
a big thing about the controls, are you still continuing with the controls?
Yeah, I just also wanted to mention that Simon can actually control his jump mid-air. He's not just locked into forward inertia. He can also double back while in air if he wants to, which can be pretty useful at some certain pitfall gaps and whatnot.
Yes, and so what the end result of this is actually that some people consider this, especially purists of the franchise, don't like the changes as much. It definitely changes the balance of the game. It becomes less Castlevania and more just a different platformer, like a more standard platformer, I guess, in a way.
I don't see why you're not allowed to evolve, though. I think that's really holding your own series back.
Well, the play devil's advocate, big companies, and back when Konami was actually a very respectable game company, which seems so far away now, but let's not get into that. When you have a company as big as Konami, you're going to have different project leaders within your own series that'll take care of different stuff, with the exception of Hideo Kojima, certainly. But Castlevania, I imagine, had several different directors, this game's director being Masahiro Ueno. But, down the line you'd have other games handled by, let me see who made Rondo of Blood. The director of that being Toru Hagihara, and for Bloodlines, let's see, oh shoot, well, I don't have the director of Bloodlines, but the point is that Castlevania was handled by several different hands throughout the 90s until it fell into Koji Igarashi's domain, and then, when game companies had to be a little more conservative, they'd mostly say, alright, this is your series, go and run with it, and that's why there were so many games that were more like Symphony of the Night. But, before that definitive formula was laid down, Castlevania was a little looser with how it was made. And Super Castlevania 4 definitely was a lot more radical for its time, and no other game would feel quite like it either. I'm not just saying for the controls, but the aesthetics are very strange. They're not as colorful as other Castlevania games. I don't want to say drab necessarily, but its color palettes are definitely more muted than especially the very rainbow-colored Castlevania 3. And I think this makes it feel more gothic as a result. It's a
fine-looking game.
Oh,
I've always kind of appreciated the gothic look more before they went to the new, more anime-inspired art style you'd see in stuff like Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night.
Now, that's understandable, and I think I actually agree with you there. Because no game in the Castlevania series looks as good as Super Castlevania 4 does. For such an early Super Nintendo game, it really did break a lot of ground, I think. Some people might disagree that the graphics really hold up, which is with the very gratuitous Mode 7, especially in Stage 4. But
I think that the graphics, the usage of Mode 7 is very distinctive. Certainly, other SNES games used it, but stylistically, it's not a very common technique anymore. Certainly, it's very.
You're kind of limited to what you can do with it, which make it so surprising how much they actually managed to make it fit in the gameplay.
That's the thing. Yeah, I said off recording previously that Super Castlevania feels more like a tech demo in a lot of ways, and the amount of different sort of style and flair they get out of the Mode 7, it's definitely a showpiece for the early SNES. It's the kind of game that you could have broken out and been like, yeah, well, look, this is way better than Sega, because, it did things like, it had almost 3D environments in places. It did that one area which is inside a cylinder, and the whole thing constantly rotates. It's very impressive stuff. There's plenty of really nicely planned out parallax. A lot of SNES games look really flat, but the backgrounds in this game are really rich. Lots of subtle depth and movement to them. It's a very, very quality sort of overall look. It's not just the gothic sort of muted tones, which does add a nice grittiness which stands out from a lot of SNES games. And it's not the same deep black grittiness that the Mega Drive had. It's a completely different sort of muted, dark sort of look to it. I'm not really sure where you would put it as a palette, because it doesn't look like an old horror movie or a Hammer style horror movie. It just kind of feels like a washed out sort of place you don't want to be. It's very, murky and swampy for most of the game.
It does have a lot of earth tones, and most prominent colors seem to be green, brown, and blue. It seems, for some reason, there seems to be a lot of blue in what I'm seeing. But, it's not done in a sort of dull, modern Call of Duty, green and brown and everywhere and all that. It looks like mud. I really can't place this game's visual style at all, but it just, I think, still holds up and looks very well for being a game from 1991. And, there are lots of distinctive creatures, all the skeletons and bone pillars and, gargoyles, little urchins and fishmen. And I think you get attacked by, empty coffins at some point as well. But
it's a rich, sort of, bestiary. There's nothing wrong with the monsters are nice. There's plenty of them because the game's linear. It's not like Symphony of the Night onwards, I think, was when they went much more non-linear in places. This one is a strict linear line. It's still traditional Castlevania, I believe. You just go in the direction and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And as Bob said, it is a little bit easier than the games that came before it. Although as a trade,
I don't think that's a bad thing, though. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Original games got kind of rough. I mean, at least this game actually gives you health every so often. Health is super rare in the original games, from my experience.
Yeah, when I played through it for a demonstration not too long ago, I did come across a lot of small pork chops hidden in the candles, because food, health for storing food in Castlevania is somehow built into the architecture, because I don't know, Dracula has a food and walls fetish. I don't want to think about the logic of this. But although it should be noted, as a trade-off to the game being easier, it is also longer at a staunch 11 stages. Although, come to think of it, in Castlevania 3, you went through 10 stages per run in that game, so, just tacking one more on isn't too much of a stretch, but it will usually take about an hour to beat, even if you're good at it. I will note that the difficulty hikes up insanely in the final stage, with a really mean part where you get chased by a giant spiked wheel and you have to run up stairs to try and escape it, but it's really fiendishly designed, and if you make one screw up, you're pretty much instantly killed. It's like a prototype Super Meat Boy in a way, but okay, well, maybe nowhere near like that. But it does get very hard late in the game, but still, this game is much more forgiving than Castlevania 3, which is one of the hardest games on the NES, which I can say even if I really like that one as well. But I really like this one too, and I am such a Castlevania fanboy, I'm trying to hold back here. But
well, what we can move to is that there is music in this game.
Oh yeah! Oh wow! I forgot to bring up the soundtrack. Let me know the composers: Masanori Adachi and Taro Kudo. Super Castlevania 4. Its music, like its graphics, are like absolutely nothing else in the series. It's a bit drearier, I'd say, more ambient, but it's gorgeous. I'm going to be honest. It's really hard to talk about music when you don't have the music to broadcast. But let me just say, anyone, track down this game's soundtrack and let me know what you think, because I just think that there's some stuff that's good to work to, good to fall asleep to. I mean, it does get dangerous occasionally, and I should note that the first stage theme is a very triumphant sounding, it sounds creepy at first, but then it gets all really rad and prog rocky. It's known as the theme of Simon Belmont, and would actually pop up in a few other games afterwards. But then after that is more like a sort of low-key, what would you say for this?
There's definitely a lot of jazz and prog inspiration, which I think is quite stand out from some of the other Castlevania soundtracks, which are, I don't know, like more gothic, I guess, more like high energy sort of gothic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this one is a little bit more reserved, but I think that also works in favor of its also slightly more reserved graphics. The two aesthetics really seem to complement each other. One of my brother's favorite music tracks actually is the first one that plays in stage 3, that music in the cave, which is a somewhat minimalist piece that's mostly just a piano and flute, and it's very moody and beautiful. Honestly, I think
it genuinely complements a slightly more different Castlevania. You know, it's not it's not a continuation of 1 and 3. We can leave 2 out because 2 is a bit weird in places as well, but it does lend that tech demo vibe again, where it feels like the musicians behind it were like, we can use samples, and then they threw in a ton of samples to like really show off that it can do things. Also, I'm pretty sure it mostly avoids the farting trumpets. Pretty sure.
Mostly, yeah.
Like it has some string and wind instruments, but the samples they use, they work a lot better. They don't have that slight synthy toot sound, which doesn't work very well on the SNES. It's a very nice general presentation. It's very good. I don't know if I like the music as a I don't like every single moment in the soundtrack. I'm not quite as big on it. It feels kind of like, maybe partially because it changes quite a lot. Like you change scenes and you get like different snippets of music, so it kind of feels a little bit abrupt in places. Like it feels like you want to listen to it more as like a complete concept album, but
that's how I actually feel about a few prog rock albums henceforth, especially Scenes from a Memory by Dream Theater. Like, you cannot take that album any other way. It has to be start to finish, but I am digressing.
Well, yeah, like, the music may not be 100% perfect for a game because it constantly gets chopped up by changing scenes and different areas, and it kind of like rips between different tones and stuff a little bit. It's not like a big negative. It's just a little bit like you want to enjoy the soundtrack, and it's a little bit hard to enjoy the soundtrack and play the game. You got to kind of like pick.
That's a good point. I mean, the game itself does control well, but at the same time, it has just such this aesthetic magnificence about it that you can't really fully appreciate everything when you have a bunch of bats flying at your face. So, I can definitely see where you're coming from on that.
We should rank the game.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there's only so much you can say before we have to just say everything about Castlevania 4.
No, I think we've covered a good chunk. It's a bit longer than usual. Controls great, looks great, sounds great, has interesting enemies in it.
I think this one's going to be tough for us to get an agreement on, unfortunately. My thought
it's okay.
is, like, between UN Squadron and Third Strike. Okay, you know what? That's below Blue Stinger. I don't know.
I can see that Satenga's just going to be saying, like, yeah, it's got to go. It's got to go at number, 1 here.
All right, what do you think of Tank?
All right, look, I do want to be fair. I am a Castlevania fanboy, and of all the Castlevania games, was that a shot? I can't tell. But I probably would rank this in the top 5 of all Castlevania games there are. But then again, I don't want to underrate the ones based on Symphony of the Night also. But I am going to place it several clicks higher.
I'll reconsider. Maybe below Alien Soldier.
I'll be honest, that's where I'm putting it in my head, is below Alien Soldier. That was my placement for it. Because
Alien Soldier is fantastic. I don't think even most Castlevania games would beat that one.
Because the trick here is that although I think it's one of your personal favorite Castlevanias, the thing is, in a lot of ways, it is considered flawed because of the new mechanics that they introduced. That a lot of people think it's too easy. We don't necessarily agree with that, but it's a very difficult game to work because you have so much freedom compared to the other Castlevanias that in some ways you it's great as a singular game, but it certainly wouldn't. It's hard to make multiple games out of it, which is why the franchise doesn't, I think, come back to that control style. I don't believe it might, but
you're not wrong.
It feels like every time Castlevania has good new ideas, no one wants to keep using them.
Yeah, well, it was tough to do. I mean, like, this is a great send off for the traditional Castlevania style, but they already kind of hybridized it. So, because we haven't done it, we haven't looked at it yet. But I mean, like, where would Bloodlines?
Wasn't like the last classic Castlevania though, because you saw Rondo and Bloodlines.
Yeah, I know, and Bloodlines is Bloodlines is great as well. So I don't really know.
And when you have a series as big with this, with with games released within itself that are similar but different. I mean, there's a lot more variance from Castlevania to Castlevania than there is Mega Man, to be sure. And this one is a real anomaly, and that's kind of a remake, but not really, and it does do its own things that no other game really replicates stylistically or with mechanics. So, it is a bit of a loner when compared to much of the rest of the series, but where would I... Oh, wow. Well, if you guys said...
I mean, my argument for below Alien Soldier, if you'd like to hear why I would put it below Alien Soldier.
Okay, below
Alien Soldier... Yes?
You mean between Alien Soldier and Worms Armageddon in this case, right?
That's right. That's where I think it...
I don't think I'm going to argue with it, but I would like to hear your rationale. Well,
the rationale is Alien Soldier is kind of... It is very similar. Like, it's surprisingly similar in a lot of ways, but it's... Because, it actually has all of the multi-directional shooting. It has a lot of these sort of power-up styles. But instead of it being kind of an adventure, it's also a massive... Like, it's a tech spectacular for the Mega Drive. Like, it's an incredible piece of Mega Drive execution. But also, it's just nothing but bosses. And there's so much creativity in Alien Soldier. Like, every single boss is like a treasure masterpiece. I don't really know if Super Castlevania can beat that on a game level, because it is like, Super Castlevania is a fun romp that is very, very, very well executed and very nice. But I do think Alien Soldier is a game that you can come back to even more, because it's a game that you have to keep getting better at. Super Castlevania is a game that, because it has such a low difficulty compared to a lot of the other games, it's actually a game that, you can cruise through every so often. It's like, yeah, this is pretty good. I'm really enjoying this. But there's the challenge isn't there to really, keep you at that game. Like, because, you can replay Alien Soldier, like, over and over and try and get, like, good enough. Like, because I think it has some extra difficulty settings and stuff. But Super Castlevania is kind of like, it's a very nice game to play every so often. You can play it all the way through, and it's a nice cruisy game.
That actually sounds pretty sound to me, and I think I'm going to actually agree with your placement here. It's pretty damn high on the list. All right. Yeah, it's great. That puts it
That's too easy. No fights. That's great.
Our last game that we are covering for this top game session is Clash at Demonhead by Vic Takai and nominated by Griff. And if that name sounds familiar, yes, it was referenced in Scott Pilgrim, of all things. But why that is up to us to figure out, I guess, if we can.
Was this one of those NES games that was surprisingly popular? It seems like a lot of people knew this game.
Yeah, it does actually seem to have a bit of a cult following going around it, and I can actually sort of see why. It does have a rather interesting, colorful, fairly anime-ish style to it, and the hero, whose name is Billy Big Bang Blitz. Now that is quite the like a Punch Rock Groin or Old Fizzlebeef or what have you. But yeah, he is tasked to try and find a missing doctor and, discover a happening behind some sort of apocalypse that's going to occur, and he has to get these medals and then place them to stop this, world-exploding bomb from occurring. Well, I guess you don't find that out until later, and then, demons appear as well, but I guess that's a spoiler. And, you have to try and defeat the governors who hold the medals. Chief among them is a skeleton dude named Tom Gaikot, which is a strange name, but I found out it was actually a Japanese pun for skeletons or bones or something to that extent. But yeah, Clash of Demonhead is, I'd argue, early-ish example of a term that pisses people off whenever it's said, but a Metroidvania, could it be said? Would you say that, Cal?
Technically, I mean, it fits all the criteria, I guess.
Well, Bob can answer for me. I'm cool with that.
That's
Go
good.
ahead, I'm sorry.
No. Either of you. Although Bob, a little inside baseball, Bob did say before this that he didn't have as much to say about this game as we probably would. So I don't want to underrate him here.
This era is kind of out of my expertise.
Well,
I mean, yeah, the whole game is an open game, except you move along a world map sort of linear track, but the only way to change direction is to finish a stage. It's an interesting way to handle an open world without being strictly open.
Yeah, that is weird. Not all the stages are completely from left to right. There is some verticality to them, but the stages themselves are slightly simpler, maybe with the occasional hidden exit or whatever, but it's when you get to the end of a level, you then get to this map screen that shows you what junction you're at, and then you get to choose which route you want to go from there. And I guess it has some degree of consistency to it, although I believe that there are a few points where you could find shortcuts through that get you to another place that you might not have expected to end up in. The game's design, I'd say, is actually pretty intricate, almost to the point of being confusing.
It's definitely a game you probably would have broken out a map for if you didn't have one.
Yeah,
Does it come with a map? Because it seems like the kind of game where you would definitely need it.
That's a good question.
Because it tells you, hey, you need to go to Route 33, and you don't know where that is. You don't even know which direction that could be. Truth is, for me, this is pretty much your archetypal NES action adventure game right here, where everything is really vague, and you progress by just going through it again and again, and kind of just figuring a little bit out more each time. Much like Castlevania 2 or Zelda.
And could you even maybe say the same for the original Metroid? Back before it had a map going along in its game, maybe?
I'd say Metroid is a little bit slightly less vague.
Well, part of what makes Clash of Demonhead kind of difficult to figure out is it's the map, and then it's also levels. You have kind of a double layering. Metroid is still just a 2D world. You just have to map out the different blocks. Whereas the Clash of Demonhead is almost it's interconnected areas that are interconnected also via an overarching map connection thing. It's very it takes a while to map out, and I don't think the game came with a map either. You had to sort of do this all yourself and bump around and try and work out.
One other thing that this game that annoyed me. Now, this could be my fault for not looking at the manual. I don't know how helpful the manual actually is, but a lot of this game is about knowing what items you need and what they do and where you're going to need them. Like, one thing I did not know going through my first time is that staying underwater too long will hurt you, and you need a special item to avoid that. And it's not like you can avoid it, because if you jump in water, you go under it, and that still hurts you, and you don't know about that the first time, so you can be ready for that next time.
Yeah, this game definitely reminds me of a Euro game. It has a lot of the same trimmings as a popular ZX or, like Dizzy as such.
I was thinking like, Dizzy too. Is that bad?
Dizzy, when he says, because he says water, and Dizzy is like, oh yeah, you got to collect the stupid item so that you can use the stupid place. Like that's Dizzy in a nutshell. So yeah, there's definitely some Euro elements to it, but at the same time, the actual gameplay certainly is typical NES. Like, this is absolutely like straight up 2D side-scrolling NES. Like, it's just purely NES. Like, there's no other. This looks like an NES game. It plays like one, but it also has like Euro elements to it. I don't think that's deliberate, because this is a Japanese game, and they didn't really they didn't share much influence with Europe. It's distinctive, if albeit kind of a pain in the ass.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. It is a very impressively designed game. I mean, it's quite elaborate. That has all these different routes, and it keeps
fantastic box art.
Yeah, definitely. It keeps its style consistent, and it's a very big game. One that you definitely get your big bang for your buck for. If you paid for it back in the day, but it is perhaps painfully old school. Let's say, in that it doesn't really give you so much indication of where you should go, and I think even does have a few points that you wouldn't know about to look unless someone else told you about it. Like, there's like a hidden gold cache that you can reach. I don't think this was required, but like. You get no indication that there's this gold cache that's underwater, and you can actually dive under the screen and then access a secret water passageway to reach it. In fact, I think that's actually how I have to reach one of the bosses. You also have to dive underwater, but you don't have to do this too often in the game, not that I remember. I mean, it doesn't look like you can from the surface, but that's what you do have to do occasionally. And, you have all the items. There's only one place in the game where I think the super suit, the one that makes you resistant to lava, is mandatory. But, yeah, part of the game's figuring out is just kind of stumbling around and seeing where things go, then, making a note of it for later on, which was the ethos of a lot of 80s video games that certainly worked for then, and but it worked for back then, and it made them a lot more substantial for the price that you got out of them. But, I hate to say it, but gamers today are not as patient. And if they look back at Clash, they kind of wonder what the big cult hubbub was about it, when they find it could be a bit of a confusing mess if they don't know how to approach it.
Well, it's a confusing mess, because that's how games were designed,
Yeah, you were exactly what I was saying.
You were expected to buy Nintendo Power, or a friend of yours would buy Nintendo Power, or kids would get together and talk about games that they had been playing, and you were expected to get help on a lot of these games, or to collaborate in terms of finishing them. Like, that they designed them in that way. And, it was harder to provide you with information. Like, if they wanted to make a game like this, well, some of the information was going to get left out because you couldn't include it in the game. It was too difficult. Sure, like, retrospectively, it's probably not a game that a lot of people would want to go back to and play. If you played it as a kid and you liked it, you probably still like it. But, yeah, like, in general, you wouldn't want to approach it now unless you had, like, a particular reason, like you really liked this kind of game for some reason. But stuff like Metroid has aged better because it's not overly complicated. It kind of gets a little...
Yeah, the thing with Metroid is that really the only objectives are to kill Ridley, to kill Kraid, to kill Mother Brain, and get out. Like, the game doesn't tell you that, but there isn't so much to do about it. If you just stumble around and you face these enemies that are larger than everyone else, you just sort of get the idea. And that's really all you have to do. But, Clash of Demonhead is a lot more complicated. You need to get all the medals, and it takes a lot more effort to find out exactly where those go and what specific items that you need. It does add layers of complexity onto a formula which can already be a little tough to access for its time.
The thing
It's interesting because just before we get on to that, we actually played a game a little bit like this previously, ages ago. We played Dr. Chaos. This reminds me a little bit of Dr. Chaos.
Wow. Hey, you might not be wrong there. I can sort of see that connection. I mean, but this feels really big, even compared to Dr. Chaos, which is...
Yeah, like, Dr. Chaos was a bit of a handful, and this game's much bigger.
Yeah.
Which I guess is a good thing if you want a game that you can get lost in and really have to, power through, but... I don't know, it's a bit much.
And as a matter of fact, I did consider Dr. Chaos slightly derivative of the Goonies 2, which might be even worse than... it's close to the level of Clash of Demonhead. Whether it's better or worse, I'm not exactly sure, but... definite action-adventure games where it could be said that if you were to combine action and adventure and you get a game like this, one genre sort of butts with the other at some points that makes it a little hard to appreciate if you're not fully devoted to poking every corner and learning what this switch does or what have you. And well, I'm going to admit this. I do like Clash of Demonhead, but it took me a while to appreciate it. And when I did like it, when I beat it from start to finish, I shamelessly used a walkthrough, which some people would consider cheating. But in this day and age, I have some focus troubles. I haven't really been diagnosed with ADD, but maybe I should look for that at some point. And, if a game is not interesting to me for a long stretch of time, and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing with it, I would prefer that there be a solution to point me in the right direction so that, I'm not just, chasing my own tail for hours on end. So, I had no qualms with looking up a walkthrough, but, doing that somehow really made me appreciate the game more.
I always thought it was going to just, burst into flames if you touch lava. That's, oddly realistic for an NES game, I gotta say.
Yeah, its graphics may not be, anything too impressive for the time, but it does have a charming appeal about it that not a lot of other games really got its style down pat.
I want to say, since you're talking about personality, it is 100% clear that Mr. Toby Fox borrowed a couple of the characters from this game. There's no doubt in my mind that he's I'm not gonna say lifted, but he was inspired by Tom Guykott.
Yeah. The Skeleton Brothers, Sans and Papyrus are. Doesn't Papyrus just basically wear Tom's armor? His clothes are pretty much exactly like it.
He wears his armor with shoulder pads, I believe.
Exactly.
There's no doubt. Tom Guykott, if you put him next to the Skeleton Brothers, you wouldn't pick that he was. You'd assume he was the third brother. He is almost. It's just very clearly. It's not lifted, but it's more than inspiration. It's clearly taking that and reappropriating the look and feel. And also there's a character called Shark, who's one of the 7 governors, who is absolutely the inspiration for Undine.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, they're called Shark, but they look more like a mermaid. What's the deal?
That's right.
But yeah, she pretty much is, exactly. I didn't pick up on those connections, but wow, and then now I can't get over it. You're absolutely right there. That's amazing.
Surprisingly large amount of Undertale inspiration from this game, which is an interesting little feature of Clash of the Demonhead. It's part of Scott Pilgrim and Undertale, at least those 2 games. So more inspiration from this game than you would expect. Yeah,
I am pretty amazed at that. I mean, I'll say this: the game is very charming, and I can see that it definitely has a good deal of cult appeal to it. But I do like it also. But I'm going to admit, I think exactly why it's such a popular underground game as it is. I'm not sure if I 100% understand why. And that's a shocking thing to say, and I apologize to Big Bang Blitz, who I'm also sure is a big fan of this game. I mean, I think it's good, but I also think that its more obtuse elements keep it from being a true classic. Like,
It's it's one of those. Look, most of the classic NES games, they're really great, but they're played within the limitations of the NES. This is the kind of game that shoots way higher than the NES really could handle. And as a result, it's a really great NES thing, but it falls short when you kind of start comparing it to other games, because it flies a little too close to the sun as such in terms of being too big for what it really needed to be. It doesn't get the core game is not as good because the whole game as an experience doesn't stand up as well. It ages much worse than some of the more basic NES games, like Mega Man or whatever. It's like it's a solid, singular, very consistent experience. Whereas this game, it's like the interesting parts, like the exploration and having to map everything out. That was really great, but it's also like extremely frustrating and much more tedious than anyone's sort of looking for these days. Especially now that Metroidvania style games really evolved in a different direction compared to what this little game was. I don't want to talk too much more about this. This is we're going a lot over time, I think, on this particular game. I don't know, maybe.
No, I think all of our talk is pretty much on the rail here. But I
don't know how much more we have to say about the game before we start rambling into specifics that don't make any sense.
No, I pretty much exactly agree with everything you said. I mean, I don't want to parrot, but this game, I think, was much more appreciable for its time, and it probably is more fondly remembered out of nostalgia than anything. But like a good deal of Sierra games, it's obtuse to the point that if you don't have a walkthrough, it might be hard to appreciate it in retrospect. I mean, I like it, but I don't like it. Oh, jeez, I don't know. I also feel a little bit bad saying anything bad against it, because it is a very beloved game by quite a few awesome people, but I don't want to poop on anyone's sacred cows, basically, but
I'll go ahead and say it. I mean, it's not a terrible game. It doesn't do anything that many other games at the time didn't do. I'm just not quite sure what to see in it.
Well, I guess the unique stuff in this game is actually bad. Like, not at the time, certainly, but now it's like what they've added to the game to make it more unique than other NES games is what is now very frustrating, most people
I'm willing to forgive some of its flaws, because that was just the standard at the time. That was what was acceptable, but it's not much fun nowadays.
Yeah, but that's means that we can rank it, because we got to rank it, not just based on the time, but kind of nowadays. So where the hell would you put a game like this?
Yeah, that is going to be really, really hard. I'd like to hear from you guys.
I'm sitting this one out. I have no clue.
Oh,
really? Bob, I'm afraid you can't talk about it.
All right.
Bob, I understand you have no love lost with this game, so rank it as high or low as you want. I don't care, but we will adjust if we feel it deserves otherwise. That's all.
All right, let me think this. Maybe, above King's Quest?
Is a little low, I hate to say. Well, okay, it's definitely better than all King's Quest games except for King's Quest 6. In fact, I did mention Sierra earlier, but I can see how this game could be considered to be obtuse like those games, but it doesn't have any murder boat situations in it, so yeah, I would agree.
I don't know, there are a lot of instant death. Well, not technically instant death, but you're probably going to
get lives in this game,
die.
You do have infinite continues, you don't really have any lives in the strictest sense, but none of the stages are too long,
decent,
and
not
haven't.
overly punishing.
It is forgiving on that premise, at least, yes.
Maybe that's why people like it, because it's slightly more forgiving than the average.
All right. Well, we are probably going to have to up-rank it, but Cal, what do you think?
I would put it below eSWAT.
That's still a little lower than I thought it would be, to be frank. If you wanted...
Well, I really like eSWAT.
Well, yeah, eSWAT's great. I mean, I don't have any...
That's it. Why the hell is eSWAT so low, you know? Like,
wow.
What is it doing down here?
It was one of those games that was ranked before we really got into this, so maybe we weren't really
I know
of
what
sound
it
mind.
was.
All right, look, I'm going to place it even higher and fit it between Marvel Land and WWF No Mercy. That's like smack dab in the middle of the list, more or less. Because I like this game's charm, and I can appreciate its design elements, even if it doesn't necessarily translate to a game that holds up well today. But, I think it earns it, a solid slap at the middle of the list for being a game of a lot of contrasting elements.
Well, I'm not going to fight it too much.
I think, like Rainbow Islands, what a great little game. Like, it's not a frustrating...
I'm not the biggest Rainbow Islands fan, as you know. I would place it above Rainbow Islands. And
Uniracers. You think that, like,
I would,
it's better than such a unique, interesting, like, racing spectacular. You think it's better than that.
Uniracers is cool, but, I think Clash has more variety going for it. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of racing games, and even something as, weird and whacked out as Uniracers can get tired over a fair burst of time. When I got around to playing Clash, I was actually sucked into wanting to beat it, and it took a while to really find that spark, but once I got into it, I couldn't put it down.
What sets this game apart? What makes this game better than another NES platformer? Like, what really breaks it out?
It's got some interesting character design. I mean,
fine, I'll compromise. I'll place it between Uniracers and Rainbow Islands, but
I'll live with that.
That's my final offer. It's a little lower than I'd like, and probably a lot of other people would like, but if it'll...
This isn't about other people. This is our accurate listing of ranking for gaming.
We are the ones who decide the list, but it is our Twitter followers who nominate these games in the first place, and I do bring a bit of consideration into my own judgments as to what they would think of it, and I think they would place Clash of Demonhead a good deal higher than any of us would. So I just wanted to give it at least a somewhat decent ranking that it would, if not necessarily hold up as we put on more games, would still say that this is a respectable game that you should at least look into. You don't necessarily have to enjoy it, but it is worth a look. And that's why I wanted to place it.
Yes, but my argument had been, what makes it worth a look?
As a charming bit of design to it, it's very ambitious compared to other Metroidvanias. Like, you have more involved tasks to get around with. There's like a whole shop system in the game that I don't think any of us actually mentioned. That there's a lot of items that make sure that you're not just running around and shooting everything.
I did bring that up briefly, talking about the aqua lung that you basically need for certain areas.
Yeah, right. And then you find the hermit as well, and he gives you special powers that can make your game even easier, especially the teleport spell you learn from him, which is just really too helpful for getting around the map and not having to travel on for like 10 minutes more than you would. Like, it's a messy game, but it tries. It really does try, and I think just because it doesn't exactly feel like other Metroidvanias of the time did, that's in sort of this weird like school of design that is simultaneously a little less and less complex in some aspects, more complex in others, that I just think it's a real one-of-a-kind game that nothing else really feels like it. That's what I'm going with.
See, there you go. You've got to justify your placement. That way we don't feel like we're ripping people off by just putting it anywhere. You gotta...
Okay.
You gotta like, this is why it's here. This is why I want it to be here.
Oh, you were just grilling me a bit, not necessarily totally disagreeing.
Yeah, no. As long as we feel like we have like a solid reason or a coin toss, one or the other. As long as we have something to justify putting it in the list. In all honesty, like I don't mind. I think that's fine. There are reasons to play the game outside of because you ran out of NES games to play. So,
all right. Well, with that in mind, with my convincing argument, Cal, where would you place it now after taking those considerations in mind?
Well, where were we placing it? Above Uni Races or below Uni Races? What was where we had negotiated ourselves down?
Ultimately, I think I'm going to fit it between NFL Blitz and Uni Racers, if that's okay. I was originally.
I'll work with that.
Okay.
I think that's fine. Okay. This game is not the best game. It wasn't the best game when it came out, and it's still not the best game. But certainly, if you want a pretty large NES game, with some features that, I guess it's an interesting to play an NES game that's kind of too ambitious for the system, which is always it's always an interesting thing to play. And it does, manage to handle itself okay. And I'll allow like walkthroughs and stuff. You can get a little bit of help to, move yourself around. So it's not going to be the worst experience ever. And I think, whatever, it clearly had some like undercurrent, like massive influence on pop culture for some reason. Like, I don't know how it did it other than the box art is amazing.
I am still a little baffled at how it became this, giant underground hit, but
it's a true sleeper hit, apparently.
Yeah,
I don't know what happened
it just did somehow, and I'm not necessarily going to argue with it. Karnov became very popular somehow, and as much as I like Dead East, I'm going to admit that I think that's one of their weaker games. Chelnov is much better in my opinion, but that would be for another episode to discuss.
Yes, Chelnov will have to run in on a different cost. So that's cool. I think we're good with that. I think we can slot it in below the NFL of Blitz, which I've never played, but I'm sure it's very good.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest football game fan, but Blitz is definitely on the higher tier of such a genre. And I'm good with that. If you are, Bob?
For me.
That's all for this episode of Hardcore Gaming 101's Game Club 1990X. Special thanks goes out to Alm Rider, Danny Bound, Voyage to Nhasa, and Griff for nominating our games tonight. And thanks for those of you who didn't get to it yet. You know who you are, but we will get to you sooner than later. Thanks as well to my fantastic co-hosts and compatriots, Cal and Bobinator, and X Factor, who I forgot to mention, had to go back to his home planet halfway into the podcast. He will be missed dearly until we revive him out of cryogenic storage for whatever next
We were just
purpose.
Checking if they were paying attention. Did you notice that X disappeared?
Yeah, that's the litmus test, so to speak, of
we were all X on the inside.
So he's like the live stream or whatever from Final Fantasy VII, and which, it's going to be such a game to talk about if it ever gets nominated. Well, I don't want to bait people into it. Anyway, and I should also say double thanks to Cal as our longtime artist. I'm not sure what art he's been up to lately, but he is very awesome and talented, and we would not have as much personality as we do without his contributions, and also for our theme song composer Muteki, who is also very fantastic at what he does, and I am not worthy, I'm not very talented, I don't even think I made a great interim host, and hopefully Xerxes will take the reins back for our next recording 2 weeks from now, but I did my best, and if you think I sucked or not, then feel free to give me a shout out at Twitter at Contravania. Oh, and... a joke usually goes here, but That's Xerxes' wheelhouse.
The joke was this entire podcast.
Ta-da! We trolled you. Yeah, Xerxes coming out from behind the curtain. Oh no, wait, he got laryngitis. That's all right, fine. So this was the real podcast. Crap. Well, we gotta ship it out the door sooner or later. Even if it doesn't have a vocal track, like how Happy Mondays released that one album that, that's a bit of an inside reference, alright. And of course, the support and feedback of listeners like you. End this train wreck sooner than later, my god. You can support this podcast by making a small monthly donation at patreon.com/HG101 and by following at HG_101 and at GC9X on Twitter. But most importantly, help us claw our way into the zeitgeist by getting on iTunes, subscribing to HG101, and giving us a 5-star review. Do it, or we'll keep Xerxes out forever, and my reign of terror will be until I die and whatever several robot backup bodies I go through. And nobody wants that, not even me. Until next month, keep keeping it real.